Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by energy and environment reporter Jeremy Beaman. Jeremy, President Biden has once again tapped the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. How is this different from when he's done it before? And talk a little bit about what issues are at play and why this was done.
Right. This is the third time Biden has done this. The first time was back in November. He did it again in March, and now the administration has announced that they're going to, over the next 6 months, on average, every day, release 1 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And so this effort is a bit different than especially the release that they announced back in November, because Biden's using basically emergency authority under this case.
Right.
The SPR can be opened and is required actually by Congress to be opened every so often. Congress mandates sales each year. They attach little provisions in spending bills that say, basically, Energy Department, you have to sell this many barrels. And so Biden, his announcement last November to do this, when oil was around $85 a barrel or something,
Sure.
Was in part based on that sort of authorization. But this new announcement, which, if you add all that up, 1 million barrels a day for 6 months is about 180 million barrels. That's a lot of oil. This is going to be done under sort of Biden's designation of this situation in the global oil market as an emergency, as it being interrupted. Now, it's kind of interesting to watch what Biden's doing and compare it to what OPEC is doing right now,
Sure.
because it's basically determined that the market is well supplied, and that the reason prices are high right now, OPEC says, is because of the war in Ukraine and the volatility that it's caused in the market. And so traders are certainly sort of factoring in what could happen in weeks and months to come, and that certainly is contributing to prices. But Biden has determined, the administration has determined that we're short on barrels, and so that's why they're sort of going forward with this emergency action and not letting the market do its own thing on its own.
Which is interesting because they were pretty big into the Putin price hike messaging themselves early on.
That's right, and they still are really. In fact, the White House's announcement had those words in the first line of the announcement. So they're definitely leaning into that explanation, and certainly it's undeniable that's playing a part.
Sure.
In all this. If you look at a graph of how oil was trading, on February 28th and afterwards, the spike is astronomical. So it certainly is being priced in the war. And again, it's shocking to see how differently OPEC is acting, and then the Biden administration's acting in response to all this.
Now, President Biden is juggling a lot of different energy crises or energy issues right now. Yes,
he is. He of course, his driving motivation is dealing with climate change and over time reducing fossil fuels. Of course, the war has thrown a monkey wrench into that.
Sure.
And for the Europeans too, they've really had to shift course, and it's starting to look like really headstrong green policy is kind of a luxury for peacetime, because Europeans too, or many countries are saying they're going to burn more coal now, and while they try to stop burning Russian gas. And so Biden, for his part, is teaming up with Europe to try to get them more American gas through all this. And this is what industry in the United States wants him to do. This is what Republicans want him to do. This is not what environmental groups want him to do. And they're very critical of his decision to basically bless the construction of new gas infrastructure. And remember, just back in December, basically the State Department sent a cable to embassies across the globe and said, for financing basically energy projects now, we're not going to really be doing fossil fuel infrastructure anymore. We're going to do clean energy stuff unless it's determined to be in a nation's national security interests. Well, you can imagine that they might be rethinking that now. There's been no really announcement on pulling back from that, but the Biden administration does want to get Europe more natural gas, and that's sort of his big focus right now. And the administration's trying to, as EPA Administrator Michael Regan said, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Others have used the same metaphor, and so they're trying to to keep their climate change goals in mind. They want to go green, but they're having to deal with how prices are right now, and that means more oil and gas.
I mean, there certainly always seems to be a new obstacle to the green energy agenda. First, they couldn't really get much done legislatively. Then you have just high prices as you approach an election year. Then you end up with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the European energy crisis. But the White House hasn't completely given up on its green agenda.
No, and not just the White House, but the administration elsewhere is doing other things to sort of move the agenda forward in regulatory ways. Recently the SEC, of course, put out their proposed rule on climate change disclosures, which would require companies to say more publicly to investors about how much they emit and their operations are responsible, how much carbon emissions and other emissions they're responsible for emitting, but also how these companies are preparing for extreme weather situations. And so that's out in the ether now.
Right.
And that generally pleased Biden's environmentalist constituencies. But even then, they were still some of them were kind of disappointed that they weren't more aggressive.
Right.
But that's one way that sort of the administration's climate agenda is being moved forward. And the Interior Department's still moving forward on doing reviews for offshore wind,
sure.
Which is a big priority of the administration, and recently announced that they're going to hold a sale in May for some acreage off of the Carolinas. So they're still doing things,
right.
but of course they're being overshadowed by what Biden is having basically to talk about, and Jen Psaki is having to talk about every day,
right.
Which is oil prices, and to really try to keep their environmentalist constituencies and Democrats not at bay, but happy and on board with what they're doing, and also to not allow the high prices to hurt Americans' pockets, and of course Democrats in midterms.
So they could take some shots at big oil, but they kind of do have to play ball with the energy industry a little bit more than maybe environmentalists would like.
Yeah, that's certainly true, and different people, outsiders, analysts have judged the situation differently, but certainly there's a sense in which, maybe not a 180-degree turn that the administration's made, but it's certainly a detour they've had to make in terms of sort of courting oil companies and saying things now that they never would have said or never would have imagined themselves saying 4 or 5 months ago in terms of oil production. But again, as you say, they're sort of courting oil companies and keeping them at arm's length at the same time, and
right.
and trying to in many ways blame them for the prices that we're seeing, along with Putin,
Sure.
rather than Biden's policies, of course.
Putin and petrol. Thank you, Jeremy.
Sure.
You can read Jeremy and subscribe to our Daily on Energy newsletter at WashingtonExaminer.com.